Melissa Harrison here for our latest edition of the Religion Unplugged podcast. Today, our executive director, Paul Glatter, is in Norwalk, Connecticut, talking with Tim Pool. Tim is an award-winning American journalist, YouTuber, and political commentator. He was the founding member of Vice News. He worked at Fusion, and he has covered major events all around the world. He might best be known for his groundbreaking live stream coverage of the 2011 Occupy Wall Street protest movement. He has a lot to share about his perspective on journalism and religion from a global perspective, and he talks with Paul about it. Let's listen in.
Okay, so this is the Religion Unplugged podcast, and I'm interested in your thoughts on big tech and the risks to First Amendment. First Amendment being both freedom of expression as applied in written and verbal form, but also freedom of religion and other parts of it. What does the world need to be concerned about? What should religious people be concerned about regarding what you see in big tech?
So here's a question that I ask my friends. How many Christian nations are there? And I don't necessarily mean like declared, but like majority Christian.
Are you talking like Sweden, Germany with like a Lutheran kind of official state church, or
majority Christian?
Majority Christian. I'd have to guess, but I don't know. 20?
It's a couple dozen.
Yeah.
Like, do you know how many Christians are on the planet? Of whatever denomination. Just
a couple billion, 2-3 billion.
I think it's two, close to 2.1.
It sounds right. Yeah.
Do you know how many Muslim nations there are on the planet that officially recognize Islam and have majority Islamic?
50, 100.
It's a couple dozen.
Yeah,
right,
a couple dozen. Oh.
And how many Muslims are there on the planet?
1 billion.
1.6.
1.6, yeah.
Then I ask, how many Jewish countries are in the world?
One.
Technically. It's divided into two states. So you've got Israel, Palestine, and the conflict.
Right.
So it's a conflicted state. And how many Jews are on the planet? In the total diaspora,
20 million?
I think it's like
30?
10 or so.
10 million, yeah.
And so it's really interesting to me, I bring this up because you end up with anti-Semites, like the Women's March leaders who were outed by Tablet Magazine and the New York Times for being anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. And then, but the big tech companies, who do they rush to the defense of? Specifically Islam. I'd be willing to bet if you posted right now something disparaging about a Christian, you'd have no problem. You publish something disparaging about Muslims, you'll be banned in 2 seconds. And I think, the argument they often bring up is that because in the United States, Muslims are a marginalized group, but they don't realize that these policies are global and impact Europe and other places where they're not. And so you end up getting this, it's a really weird and twisted perspective these people in Silicon Valley have as to what Islam is. Like Indonesia is Islamic. Those are majority, Southeast Asian, Pacific Islanders. They're not Arabic.
Yeah, it's the biggest Muslim majority country on earth, I think.
Yeah. And they have dramatically different views of Sharia law as opposed to other countries. It's much like
Saudi Arabia is trying. The Wahhabi movement's funneling a lot of money there to try to make parts of it more radical.
Right. Because it's not really. It's it's fairly secular. They have like a female prime minister, I think. I could be wrong.
They definitely have these huge moderate Muslim groups that believe in peace. I've been there, and they have a different view on public life. Yeah.
So I guess it's my concern is if you're look at r/atheism on Reddit, mm-hmm. predominantly anti-Christian. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's so crazy to me that we're seeing articles that pop up from these left-wing media outlets where they praise Abrahamic religion, at the same time the same outlets attack Christianity. I'm like, I don't care which religion you're practicing within any religion. I believe they all are deserving of respect and to listen, and the freedom of religion. But the big tech companies hold a specific political tribal. It's tribal politics, but also ideological. Where a friend of mine she's not Muslim. She has a poster of it's like the Barack Obama poster, but it's about protecting Islam. And I'm like, you're not Muslim. Why would you have that while you simultaneously rag on Christians all day? Can't you recognize both religions have virtues and failures and respect people for their beliefs? I don't understand how that is. And then that's a part of the ideology we see in Silicon Valley and how it pertains to r/atheism, a huge subreddit that in the early days of Reddit was just specifically anti-Christian. And today still kind of is, but Islam is totally fine. So I think that's ultimately going to be damaging. But more importantly, I think my bigger concern is look, man, I don't think Christians or Muslims need anybody's help. There are billions of them. My bigger concern is how we have the far right, alt-right, whatever you want to call it, who are very anti-Semitic. And then we have the identitarian left, which are also very anti-Semitic. And that's why I made the point about, Israel as like a conflicted state for Jewish people, and there's very few relative to the other Abrahamic religions. Yet we see the big tech come to the defense specifically of Islam, and then we see like the Women's March leaders, we see the far left progressive Democrats who are aligned with them, and in private they say horrifyingly anti-Semitic things. So I think, I guess long story short, what I see from big tech is a complete bias in which religions they're willing to protect. And if they just upheld the principles of the First Amendment, then everybody would be okay, right? Or actually, I mean, you'd end up seeing a bunch of people saying a whole bunch of awful things, but it's better than a select few getting the privilege to attack specific religions while the others are like beaten down and they say, oh, but you're secretly privileged. It's mind-blowing stuff to me,
I suppose some of it is that, like in the case of Christianity, it's seen as, because it was European and American, essentially, it's the
Whiteness.
man. It's the man. It's the authority, and it's and Islam needs care or something to evolve forward.
I think it's all rooted in racism. I really do. I know it's more nuanced, and it's not just complicated to say they're all racists. But I had a conversation with a guy in the UK who said, if you're anti-Islam, you're a racist. And I asked him, I was like, but what is, like, why? Like, someone else was like, Islam's a religion, you can't call someone racist. And he was like, you're talking about Arabic people. And I was like, what about Indonesia? And I think Indonesia isn't the only Southeast Asian Muslim nation. And the guy was like, racism. And I was like, let me ask you this. And this was an Antifa guy. If you had a white Muslim, an Arabic Muslim, and an Indonesian Muslim, and someone pointed at all three of them and said, I don't like what you're saying, you'd call them racist? Like, which race? Because it's a religion. And the same thing is true for Christians. You're right, they view it as the European, as the man, and then it's like associated with whiteness. But what about Christians in literally every other part of the world, in Africa, who are targeted and persecuted and executed, and the Christians in Egypt, for instance? Like, religion transcends race. It's a belief structure. It's an ideology.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the arguments we hear, and especially the practices held up by media companies, like the big tech companies, are based on a racist view of what religion is. They think Christians are white, and they think Muslims are Arabic, and that's just wrong. You can believe whatever you want, regardless of where you come from. There are white Muslims, there are black Muslims, there are white Christians, there are black Christians, and especially in the U.S. But it really is crazy to me. Like, I don't think the ideology we see that's behind big tech, I don't think it's cohesive. I think it's mostly just tribal. And so it's kind of amorphous. It's just so long as the tribe is in line with it, they accept it.
You've been talking a lot about deplatforming. You have if you listen to Tim's videos, he has an excellent grasp on sort of Telecommunications Act that set up the conflict of platforms versus publishers. It's unclear in American law what exactly some of the responsibilities are for some of these big tech platforms. But where is it going? Where do you, in terms of, you said, I think in a recent podcast, regulations coming.
Oh yeah,
I think we all know that, right?
It doesn't matter what they do at this point.
What are your concerns of, like, how regulation, what should it look like if it is indeed coming, or what are your worries if it doesn't look?
So here's some of the challenges. YouTube can't exist. The only reason YouTube exists is because Google pays for it. YouTube loses money. So we need to get to a point where the compression rates are better and the data transfer rates are cheaper, because so much video is uploaded to YouTube. I think if we broke up Google, you look at YouTube and it's got multiple companies funding it, supporting it. YouTube itself hosts videos. AdSense supplies ads, sells and buys. And then YouTube itself has a marketing branch where it promotes, recommends videos. So it's actually a bunch of different functions. How do you break it up? Do you say YouTube is one company? Okay, if you move YouTube out, then you've got the marketing branch and the hosting branch. But then the advertisements, which support YouTube, are now a different company that YouTube would have to negotiate with. I don't know if that could work. I don't. YouTube, if we break up Google in that way, YouTube might become a pay-only service. And then you pay, X amount of dollars per month for hosting time. When I upload a podcast, I actually pay for hosting time. It is not like YouTube. It is not ad-supported, so I'm paying like $20 a month for a dedicated amount of server space. YouTube might turn into that, and videos are big, so if you're someone who uploads every day, you might end up paying hundreds or thousands of dollars per month. So you got to figure out how to monetize that. That might be the smart thing to do, because YouTube should not exist. I appreciate that it does, but it's built upon the monopoly of Google. It's subsidized by Google's other businesses to make it exist. Maybe it shouldn't. Maybe there should be a different structure that supports a viable business. I honestly don't know. A lot of people are saying the Section 230 thing is a good attack vector to get these companies in line. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is basically that no provider or user of a platform shall be considered the speaker of content provided by another user or platform. So that means if I write something on Facebook, Facebook's not in trouble. It also means that if I post something on Facebook and then someone else comments, I'm not in trouble. Mm-hmm. However, it's considered the good faith provision. The idea being that these companies were going to act like a phone company. Mm-hmm. Instead, they're literally publishers with editorial stances. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, Twitter is now going to label public tweets, like tweets that break the rules that they think are in the public interest. Well, that's an editorial position. That is not a platform. Right. Could you imagine if AT&T said, we're going to restrict your phone calls to this number because we think it's not in your interest? Like, that's not a carrier. That's ridiculous. So what these platforms are doing is they're operating as both platforms and publishers. Yeah. When it comes to the defense of why they're not liable, they say, we're just a platform. We let people say whatever they want. Mm-hmm. Then when it comes to rejecting third-party apps, they say, we're a publisher. We can choose which third-party apps can use our service. Mm-hmm. So Facebook argued in court. They were a publisher because they didn't want to allow one company access to their third-party apps. They then argued later they were a platform and that they're not liable for the speech of others. They're literally playing both sides. Law needs to come down and clarify what they are. I think, there might be a really simple solution. Calling any platform that provides open access speech to a certain amount of people, calling it specifically a carrier. End of story. Mm-hmm. And if the speech is legal, it's done. There's challenges to that. Like doxing is bad, right? So Antifa doxed Tucker Carlson recently. That would be legal. It is legal to share an address. You might get a civil fine for revealing public information. There might be a harassment charge. But I could be wrong. My understanding is if you have someone's address and you say, hey, this is their address, that's just information you're putting on the public. I don't know if there's any laws against that. Mm-hmm. So basically we have these expectations of these social media companies to remove content that people would find obscene because it's a mix of carrying and broadcasting, but they're totally trampling all over the spirit of the law. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, when they ban anybody they want, they argue on the First Amendment that we have a First Amendment right to speak what we want, and no one can force us to speak what we don't. Mm-hmm. But Section 230 says you will not be considered the speaker. Therefore, they should not be removing content. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's going to happen. The problems are way too complicated for me to figure out. A lot of the problems are algorithmic, and you can't regulate to technology, right? You can't regulate that they invent something. You can try. I don't know if it'll work. But what I know is this. Project Veritas released a bunch of information. I was able to corroborate a little bit of it, which leads me to believe the rest is true. But I got to say, some of the stuff is so unbelievable. Like the Resist document telling people to chant, the stuff about no walls in sanctuary cities. That's overtly political. But I've seen some of the information. I corroborate some of it, and so I trust that whoever gave them these documents is genuine. Regardless of what is really happening at Google, whether this woman, Jen Janai, is just one person with silly opinions, doesn't matter. Republicans see it, we want an investigation, and there should be one. And now there's going to be a deeper investigation. Look, you've got James Damore, his lawsuit's carrying, and he stepped into arbitration, but the lawsuit is still moving forward, that Google is biased against Asians and Asian men and white men. You can't have this lawsuit moving forward into discovery. So there's investigations happening. You have the email from this guy referring to Jordan Peterson, PragerU, and Ben Shapiro as, those World War II guys, I'll put it that way, trying to soften up the language for your podcast. They're saying it. You have a video released in 2018 of Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, saying, I am deeply offended by this election. These people don't hold our values. At what point is it fact? The evidence is overwhelming. We know they manipulated search results because a journalist wrote about how she requested they change the search results for pro-life and got the outcome she desired. Then Veritas released a document showing the blacklist, which contained all these different words. It's like there's so much evidence the media refuses to touch it. I have no idea why they love Google so much, but I'll say this. Veritas sent a letter out to a ton of politicians they're absolutely going to now launch. They're going to go hardcore against it. So I warned, in the podcast on Joe Rogan, I said regulation is coming, and Vijaya Gadde had a smirk on her face, and she was like, "Well, I talk to these people, and I know." And I'm like, "You think you know? You don't." It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what people think is true. And Republicans right now feel attacked. I think there's overwhelming evidence to prove conservatives are being silenced on social media, and I think the reason it's happening is because conservatives are substantially better at the internet ecosystem. They say the left can't meme. There was a study done that found that 4chan and the Donald produced the overwhelming majority of successful memes. They're really good at it. Look at you see that video that Donald Trump tweeted from Carpe Donktum, where the power goes out at the Democratic debates. Then it plays Ozzy Osbourne, and then all of a sudden the lights turn back on and there's a fog, and then Trump walks out clapping and everyone's screaming and cheering. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. It says nothing about Trump's policies. It says nothing about the debate. But that is the power of a meme, to make you laugh when you see Trump dominate the stage. People want to have fun. So conservatives know how to make jokes. They're having a good time, and they're winning that battle. The response we see is Twitter starts arbitrarily banning people, putting their ideology in the rules. Well, here's what I think will happen. I think regulation will happen. You can't stop the tide at this point.
Zuckerberg even asked
for
it, and his co-founder said, break it up.
Because he wants to guide it. He wants to have some control over it.
Right.
But it's going to happen. I believe, so it was already ruled, Packingham v. North Carolina, Supreme Court ruling that the government cannot restrict access to social media. That means the only thing that could come from regulation in terms of speech is free speech. The government can only ensure it, they can't restrict it. I believe that will likely happen, and when it does, Republicans will sweep the internet. Their content will explode. The left will be crushed because I think it's a collectivist versus individualist situation. When you try to interview people on the left, liberals, they say, we'll get back to you. You try to interview a conservative, they say, can we do it now? I walk up to a guy in the street with a Trump hat, say, hey, can I interview? Yeah, absolutely. I walk up to a progressive, and they'll start chanting, put a sign in my face. When I tried interviewing the DSA, they said, we'll get back to you in a couple days. I can walk up to literally any conservative, and they'll be like, please interview me. That difference means that when it comes to memes, when it comes to the internet, conservatives will say whatever they want, and the liberals wait for cues to make sure they're in line with their collective before they can post something that may be offensive. You even see very prominent feminists have to apologize all the time because they try to be outspoken and then get attacked for it. Like a good example is woman, spelled correctly, is considered exclusive. So they created Womxn, W-O-M-X-N. And they say the X, now the word represents trans women and women of color. Then another group came out and said, why do they need a special word? Are you a racist? Women of color and trans women are women. So now both women with a special spelling and spelled correctly are both offensive to the exact same group of people, and you have no idea which. This results in a lot of people on the left not saying anything and not doing interviews. They want to fall in line with the tribe and make sure it's acceptable within the collective. That makes them slow. And conservatives pump out memes like crazy and see what sticks, and that makes them extremely effective. So I think if we move to a free speech internet with regulation, conservatives are going to be like a tsunami, just like boom. Yeah.
Well, do you see the deregulation for those of us like who don't, I'm not looking for memes that much. I want to know what's going on in my town. I want to know, about crime. I want to know about school boards, things like that. And you spoke earlier how I think we've destroyed the ecosystem for that information reporting, essentially, right?
Social media did.
Yeah, and frankly, I would like to see conservatives do more reporting.
I agree.
In addition to opinion, but will the deregulation that we know will happen in big tech, do you think it will favor, will allow for an improved, civic ecosystem of information that's not just...
Oh, no, it'll be worse. Way worse.
Okay.
Substantially worse. It's going to become the internet will become a nightmare. So look, there's very few Klansmen, in the world. But on the internet, they're fervent and vitriolic and just... Once they get free reign, they're going to pump out thousands of tweets per day. The problem right now is the equivalent of a Klansman on the left, a left-wing identitarian, has free reign to pump out their insane nonsense. So we see it. Make a free speech internet, and you're going to see the crazies of the right pop up, and it's going to be, and then both sides are going to go crazy. I have no idea how to solve that problem. Social media has amplified the extremists. Because social media only really targets right-wing extremists, you have this very clean-cut conservative base on the internet and a fringe, wacky left losing its mind. And then the Democrats try to chase after woke Twitter, and so they say ridiculous things on the debate stage, and they're circling the drain, man. I can't believe it.
Okay, well, I guess my last question for you, I really appreciate your time and showing us your awesome facility here.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what would you want to say to, like, Gen Y and Gen Z? And I teach them in the classroom, but to those generations as to, like,
Gen Y gets
the way
it,
to
man.
live right now.
Gen
like,
Y
the way to live.
Well, Gen Y are millennials, I think. Like millennials, they've lost it. I don't know. Gen Z is smart. I think what happened was Gen X grew up before the internet. Millennials grew up at the right time, and Gen Z grew up with the internet. So what I mean by right time is millennials. When I was young, I always had the internet. So I'm probably more similar to a Gen Zer. But most millennials didn't have the internet until they were young teenagers, and so they didn't have this ingrained in them to do their own research and be mentally resilient. So all of a sudden now the internet appears, and they start getting inundated with this nonsense identitarian articles from these outlets, and their brains turn to mush. Gen Z grew up with that, and so they don't believe anything on the internet. The internet's full of lies. So you see the story, and they roll their eyes, and then they look for themselves. So Gen Z has actually shifted more towards conservative. They're definitely still more progressive than Gen X, but it's the first time in the past, 150 years that a generation has moved to the right, even if it's just a little bit. Gen Xers grew up at a time where if you wanted to know something, you had to figure it out yourself. So by the time you were like 19 or 20, if you needed to know something, you had to do research. Millennials would just go online and see it and go, so it was a bad time for millennials. So I guess my advice to everybody is 90% of the media is some kind of lie. Or some kind of false information. It's really hard to know, because even I rely on NBC sometimes, even though I know NBC's put out fake news before recently. Like, I'll read an NBC article and just be like, what else can I do? So then when they have to issue a correction, so do I. It's tough. It's a huge challenge. But I guess the last thing I can say in this particular line of thought is I don't know if you've ever heard of the dihydrogen monoxide hoax. You ever hear of that?
No, maybe.
It's a funny old joke, came up in the 80s, I think. Basically, it goes like this. Have you ever heard of hydric acid? Do you know what that is, hydric acid?
Yeah.
You know what hydric acid is?
I've heard of it.
It's a corrosive substance. They use it to clean car batteries, to get the gunk off.
Yeah.
It's used in nuclear facilities. So recently, we found out that in New York City, they were finding large quantities of hydric acid in the plumbing systems. And this is stuff that's found in all cancer. 100% of cancers has hydric acid in it. If you inhale a little bit of this, you could die. And that's in New York plumbing. Don't you think we should get somebody to do something about it? Right? Wouldn't you agree that something should be done about this? That's how politics works.
That was true. Yeah.
It is true. Everything I said was true. 100%. I'm not kidding. It's factually correct. Yeah, hydric acid is water. The way I frame it's called the dihydrogen monoxide hoax. Frame something in a way and you can freak people out. That's what the news is. If we need to make you angry, how can we do it? Framing. So you take a story about a white cop and a black guy, and then you frame it in such a way where it sounds like the cop was the bad guy or the black guy was the bad guy, and then you feed it off to whatever audience is going to be receptive to it. And that's what media's been doing. Not because journalists are bad people, but because journalism died when the internet fractured, when information became so cheap that, we used to pay the New York Times for public access intelligence. You have private intelligence, you have public intelligence. Well, guess what? Public intelligence became almost free because of the ability to replicate data. So the only way to monetize now is to compete for what can catch attention. And now we've gone from news agencies being intelligence agencies for the public to being attention agencies for the public. To capture your attention, I'm going to tell you hydric acid's in your water, and it's used to clean car batteries. And it's they store nuclear rods in hydric acid, and that's in your plumbing. And then you freak out, you share it, gets 100,000 views, and people, that's a really good example because
Wasn't there a story too? It's people growing horns. There was a false. I think it was false. Like Washington
From hunching
Post.
over, they're getting horns.
Right, growing out of the back of your skull.
Look at
which
the
turned
woman.
out to be a false story that the Washington Post.
Covington.
Wrote. Yeah, Huffington wrote.
No, Covington kids.
Oh, right.
Really good example.
Yeah.
Look at the story of the woman who they claimed was 17 and depressed, so a doctor euthanized her. Totally fake. And everyone just picked it up and ran with it without question. Why? It was juicy. It was money. Money in the bank. That's one of the reasons I use NewsGuard. I disagree with them on a lot of their ratings, but that's a good thing. I shouldn't be choosing what is credible or not. And even though I think NewsGuard gets it wrong sometimes, for the most part they do a good job. I think they're balanced. They give Daily Wire a green check. They give Huffington Post a green check. I get it. They're biased. I trust one more than the other. But when I read something, I want someone else to be checking my biases. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I will read from sites that are rated negatively by NewsGuard, mm-hmm. but only if they get the green check mark in doesn't present false information. Mm-hmm. You can criticize them for not disclosing who funds them or for being an opinion column and not disclosing that either. It annoys me. But as long as NewsGuard says you don't publish fake news, I'm willing to use it to varying degrees, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like NewsGuard, I sort of believe in the old school idea that, and I think some people forget in the discussion of fake news or when news media make mistakes, good news outlets correct themselves, right? I actually believe the corrections process is clunky and flawed, and I'm working on some stuff to fix that in the industry. But Hollywood doesn't correct itself when it makes mistakes. There's a lot of people who don't admit their lies, but at least our ethical ideals in our industry is that. We fire people who lie. The New York Times fires people who lie.
But here's the thing. They only do when they have to. Look at that. What was that German guy, I can remember, who was working for
Der Spiegel, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Another recent case, yeah.
Yeah. He got away with it forever. Nobody wanted to question it. It was too good. You look at...
But I would say, having worked inside the Wall Street Journal, I know they don't fire people unless they have to, but also I do see if someone makes tons of mistakes... they're demoted, their pay's docked, it's a bad thing, and people are managed out.
That's when people know about it. Look at the New York Times running a front page story from Kevin Roose. The whole thing's fake. The whole story he published was completely fake.
Which one?
The one on YouTube radicalization.
Oh.
I officially canceled my New York Times subscription following that story. I have no problem if they want to hire Kevin Roose, who's an identitarian, or Sarah Jong, who's an identitarian. I get it. You have some kind of weird, cultist belief. Fine. I think you're nuts. As long as the news is following an editorial standard, I don't care what you believe. I'm not a religious person. I have no problem if a journalist is religious, so long as they follow basic editorial standards. I can understand their perspective. But when you publish front page news where you lie nonstop, I kid you not. First of all,
did Roose I read his column right in his coverage, and I don't analyze it everything word by word, but I would guess some of his stuff is good, maybe. But did he or any editors admit later that story wasn't on the money?
The story,
the one that you're talking about,
right? So the problem is the story is so obviously insane; it doesn't even follow its own premise. It's I would make it akin to Alex Jones writing a front page article from the New York Times. He claims he found someone who was a regular person who goes on YouTube, and then YouTube made him become a radical. Except the guy actually says in the article he never went alt-right. He was just a traditional conservative. He then says that watching YouTube made him a liberal, the complete opposite of the premise presented in the title. The whole story is a twist that contradicts itself and disproves itself. There's no data. There was no analysis. There were no corrections when it was proven wrong. I sent him the data. He messaged me about it. He never included any stories or any updates or corrections. The whole thing was fake. It's literally made up. He found a guy. So I'll tell you the premise of the story. Kevin Roose of the New York Times watched a YouTube video and then created a conspiracy theory about what he thought it meant, with no data, no fact checking, nothing to back up his claim.
The guy he profiled. Did you talk to that guy?
Yep.
And did he say he was taken out of context? Or
he did.
Oh, interesting.
But not to the degree that I'm claiming. He said that there were certain people included who should not have been included in the story, and that was a mistake. He says he was never alt-right. He was never completely radicalized. He never bought into far-right beliefs. That's all in the story. So how you write a front-page story claiming YouTube radicalized someone when the premise is that a conservative watched YouTube and then started watching liberal YouTubers, that's literally in the story. The whole premise was backwards. It made no sense. I don't know why, I'll tell you this. I think the reason the New York Times did it is you take a look at the New York Times social media engagement and it's trash. What do they have, 40 million Twitter followers? They get 10 retweets. Nobody cares about them. They do this story, though.
Well, to be fair, we can talk and criticize at times, but I will say to their credit, they've got 4.3 million subscribers, and they want to get to 10 million. So they are hiring, they are profitable, they're doing. They have some good strategy, although.
And part of it includes
their Twitter strategy.
This story got 10,000 plus retweets in a day. Yeah, good business. Congratulations. Evil. Disgusting. I know Kevin Roos personally. I know him to be a liar, and I have no problem stating on the record the man lies. And I have chat logs of him admitting to refusing for us to call out an organization for refusing to fact check. So, long story short, an organization did some really unethical news practices. And when I was working at Fusion with Kevin, who was the managing editor, I said, I want to do this story. He said, don't do it. Don't call them out. No, because we don't want to get called out either. Yep. Nice. And then sure enough, well, I'll just tell you, the organization was the New York Times. They heavily edited an article. 85% of an article was changed. They turned it from a fact-based short news story with 100 words into an analysis op-ed in favor of feminism. And when I said this is a huge deal, it violates most tenets of the internet, the story was purged from Reddit. One of the top all-time stories of Reddit, purged for breaking its rules. And he told me not to publish the story because we do the same thing. Fusion does. And then sure enough, he goes and works for the New York Times right afterwards. Yeah, the dude's dirty.
Interesting.
Yep.
So,
I reached out to the New York Times, and you know what their response is?
What?
Yeah, nothing too polite.
Okay.
Yeah, I won't swear. It's not like they directly said, screw off or something. They just said, like, we appreciate the feedback. Oh. And then did they make any changes? Did they correct? Nope.
That original story you're talking about,
right.
The front page.
The story has no data in it. None. Literally none. It was one guy who watched a YouTube video, and they ran a front page story about his conspiracy theories about why it happened. That, to me, is mind-blowing. When the New York Times falls to that level, journalism's dead and dying, right? Like, it died a long time ago with the rise of these insane, hyper-partisan websites that were trying to make you angry for money. And the New York Times can't compete. Or, look, everybody wants to grow forever. They want to grow forever. The New York Times, they want to hit 10 million. Here's how you do it. You write nonsense. You go Alex Jones. Alex Jones paved the way for everybody. And that's what they're doing. Wall Street Journal's still pretty good. They're the only ones I still pay for.
Okay.
Yep. And their opinions are conservative, so I can disagree in that regard.
I agree. Well, I guess I could agree to criticize the Journal or the Times on different stories or points, but I still believe there's good reporting happening in both the publications. We could agree to disagree or whatnot.
Well, yeah, there is.
But I think one thing I'm interested in is this, like, the idea of slow news movement. I guess some German researchers had talked about it. It's not that revolutionary of an idea, but the notion that maybe reading a little less on Twitter and more in print, making a choice, hey, I read the Journal or I read the Times or the New Yorker, whatever it is, but also maybe being more thoughtful about each piece. Like,
do you know what Gell-Mann amnesia is? The Gell-Mann amnesia effect. If you're an expert on a certain issue, like this is why I canceled my subscription to the Times. I am an expert on YouTube. I understand the algorithm greatly. I've looked at all the data. I've researched this. I've been smeared by people who are lying about it. I see that story. I know it's fake. The average person, so I'll give a better example would be let's say you're a carpenter, and there's a front page story in the Times about carpentry, and you read it and you go, what? This is nonsense. They have no idea what they're talking about. You then turn the page and you see a story about Syria and go, wow, I didn't know that. If you saw them publish fake news, why would you assume anything else is true? You can't. You have to assume it's fake. The area in which you're an expert, they've proven to be not knowledgeable of. Why would they be knowledgeable on anything else? So when I see an overt fake story promoted front and center, I cut off the news stores, for the most part.
Interesting.
So I stopped subscribing.
Because the
same thing happened for Washington Post. I was like,
So I intern at the Washington Post once. Like when you're when you work at a place or in the industry for 10 years or 20, I know a lot of the names, and I know when I read the business section at the Times, the Journal, the Post, like certain writers who are really awesome and really on point. So I maybe journalists or experts on certain topics we read with certain increased knowledge. I think we need tech, frankly, that helps readers. That the more tech we have, helps news organizations be transparent with the public, and more importantly, the public to understand, to kind of the curtain behind, the Wizard of Oz, to understand, each journalist and how good they are on that particular story or that beat. To me, that's kind of what's needed, and I hope we get more tech that does that.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, when the New York Times published that story, the people who want to believe it's true, they won't challenge it. They'll just believe it's true. A really good example is two identical circumstances. The first was something called the Alternative Influencer Network Report by Data and Society, of which I was smeared as having worked with Stefan Molyneux. I've never met the guy. They claimed that I had also worked or collaborated with Andy Worski. Never met the guy. Lies. And it was paraded around in mainstream press as fact. Everyone carried, like, it's everywhere. You know, it was like, it's been mentioned by The Guardian, Fast Company, you know, Huffington Post, just you name it. And it's still cited to this day as evidence that YouTube radicalizes. But the whole thing was fake. They claimed YouTube comedian Chris Ray Gun collaborated with Richard Spencer. It's like, if you knew who these guys were, you'd bust out laughing. Like, a better example would be like, I don't know, saying Seth Meyers showed up to Charlottesville to join the rally. You're like, that's insane. That dude there's no way that's possible. And that's what they claimed. Use as fact. Then a guy named Ewan Lenahan produced a report that did something similar with left-wing journalists in Antifa. And they ran all these stories about how fake it was. So you have quite literally the same things. One guy says, hey, look, these journalists are Antifa. Another person says, hey, look, these journalists are alt-right. The media claimed the alt-right report without fact-checking, without data, without proof, said it was true. And then they said that the Antifa one was fake because it has no data and it's not, and no one fact-checked it. That's how the media runs, right?
See, you know, sounds from everything we're talking about, it sounds like you know, I keep coming back to what are the answers, what are the solutions? Is the answer education? I mean, for broader society, to get like not on the internet but off internet. Is it events and talking to people in real places, like in this town of Norwalk,
sure.
in this theater? I mean,
you could have your newsroom ban Twitter.
Just have,
ban Twitter. Twitter and Facebook are really, really bad. The rapid sharing allows companies to weaponize rage. YouTube a little bit, but not so much, because on YouTube can't directly share.
How about your videos? Do they incite people? Is that part of your strategy, since you know that's part of the algorithm that people, certain emotions?
They call my own audience calls me a milquetoast fence sitter. That's like the common joke. So I would be an idiot or a liar if I claimed my content didn't rile people up, of course. But as much as anybody would defend their work, I feel like, for one thing, like I said, I use a third-party fact checker to check my own biases. I want to make sure, we're doing things right. I've removed myself from the editorial process for the most part of Subverse to allow them to be free of my opinion when they produce content. I don't choose the stories. I don't write the scripts. I may host some videos sometimes, but since the inception of Subverse, I have not had a hand in editorial or reporting, right? And we're going to put fact checkers on top of that. So I'm trying to do better. And then in terms of the content I produce, I think my opinions are fairly, tepid. I'll freely criticize the extremists on either side. Admittedly, we don't have alt-right people in Congress. We do have identitarian leftists in Congress, so my focus is pretty specific. And the Democrats have run off the rails because media has driven them insane. So I do point in one direction. But I think for the most part, if you're a conservative, like a hardcore Trump supporter, and you watch my content, you will be exposed to ideas you normally wouldn't be exposed to, because I will bring about, my personal reasons for being pro-choice. In an honest way. I understand why you're pro-life. I've heard your argument. I respect the argument. Now I'm going to present my argument and and the flaws within it. Just how I feel. Mm-hmm. If you have someone who's a liberal or progressive who only attacks Trump, then it's actually, I'll put it this way. It's really interesting because I've had conversations with progressives. David Pakman, for instance. I think Dave's great. I got a lot of respect for him, and we had a great conversation. And he said, my content isn't something you'd expect to see from a social liberal. And I was like, is my content wrong? Is my opinions in them wrong? Is my justification for why I feel this way wrong? None of it is. It's so look, sometimes heterodox people exist, plain and simple. My positions are slightly to the left, but I feel like the far left is destroying the Democrats' chance of actually having these positions and policies. But I thought about that, and I thought it was really interesting. What do you accomplish being a progressive, preaching to progressives about how Republicans are bad? Nothing. You push your progressives away from Republicans. What do you accomplish by being a social liberal who's willing to engage with Republicans? You are able to then share liberal ideas to people who normally don't hear them. So my audience isn't actually overtly Trump supporters. It's actually kind of moderate right to moderate left. Mm-hmm. It's mostly centrist, I've found. I don't know for sure. I'd be willing to bet that if we were doing a percentage base, it would be 40% Republican, then 20% liberal, and the rest are moderate, middle centrists. Mm-hmm. So liberals, I think the easy way to explain it is my friends that I grew up with, that I hang out today, all liberals. All liberals, mm-hmm. Emily is like Bernie Sanders, Mm-hmm. But but we are like active researchers. So why is it that Emily and I will have similar opinions, but we're both kind of on the left? Is because we actually dig into these stories to figure out what's true and what isn't. But I have friends who have completely disassociated from politics. All of my friends who were pro-Bernie in 2016 said, I'm over it. It was stolen. It was a cheat. I'm not playing anymore. So when you lose the moderate Democrat types, who are the ones who voted for Obama, who say, like, we should have border security. You know, it doesn't mean we don't like the migrants or want them to be hurt. We want to protect them, but we got to have, you know, legal restrictions. They're gone. All that's left is the far left saying open borders, and the Democrats pander to them for votes. And so then me, somebody who still is this, like, 2008 Democrat Obama kind of, you know, alignment, I'm still sitting here with my same principles, my same beliefs, saying the same things. But now, you know, the way I put it is, I've got Republicans to my right, and I've got the far left. Who's closer to me in terms of principles and politics? Republicans. So they'll call me a conservative for that. But moderate liberals, they don't. They call me a liberal because I can straight up be like, here's why I agree with Obama, you know, and then they're like, I get that, I understand that, Obama was great. Even Biden was like, Obama was great, and they attacked him on the debate stage. So the way I see it is, the far left is becoming more and more prevalent because regular liberals have bowed out. The Democrats are veering further and further left because the media is convincing them this is what people want. But I assure you, the opinions of the ivory tower elites of New York is not the opinions of working class America.
Agreed.
And this can be exemplified very simply by a tweet put out by Rachel Bade of the Washington Post yesterday when she said, quote, overheard in a bar, I don't think I'm a Democrat anymore. Someone said in response to how far left the Democrats have gone during the debate. And that's what my video today that I think just went up is about. Yeah, it went up half an hour ago. That if you are a Democrat who supported Obama and you watched that debate, you're probably thinking you're a Republican now. Like 10 years ago, Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer, you know, they're all saying, we need border security, we need fences. Hillary Clinton called for a border barrier only a few years before the election. Where are they today? She was called out for it. They said, you said you wanted a border barrier. Well, it's not a wall. She has the same politics as Trump. I think one thing, you've got a couple things. You've got the media chasing this far left narrative for clicks. But you've also got the fact that Trump, on a lot of policy positions, like border security, was in alignment with the Democrats. You know, he comes out and he unfurls an LGBT flag on the Republican stage, and people clap for it. I'm like, culturally, he's moved the Republicans a little bit over. And I don't believe Trump is actually a conservative Christian. He's a New York liberal. I think he's always been fairly agnostic. He's probably Christian, but not like super Christian like the Republicans used to be. On a lot of positions, he's a bit more aggressive and to the right. But what happens when he adopts an immigration policy that's basically Obama? The Democrats have to oppose him from the left, and so it's pushed them off the deep end. You know?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay, so a lot of our listeners in different parts of the world, they're probably, this is going to boggle their minds, this conversation, which is fine.
Oh, I guess.
Yeah, but I don't know. Any thoughts for people in India, people in Africa, people in Latin America? Can their places do it better? Like somehow.
I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about, you know, everyone's
Each
kind of
one,
individual culture. We have a First Amendment in this country, which is protecting us greatly. In Europe, they arrest people for saying naughty words. So we're in a very different position. I think we're going to see regulation across the world, and if you don't have a governmental protection on expression, it's going to go the opposite direction as the U.S. Regulation in the U.S. will guarantee speech. Regulation everywhere else will take it away. You got time for one more quick point I want to make for
Absolutely.
the religious,
Go for it.
Abrahamic listeners?
Yep.
I want to tell you a quick story. I grew up Catholic. I am not particularly. I am no longer in alignment with Abrahamic belief, but I still believe in God, and it's a very complicated belief I have. But I believe in God, and what I think is really important for liberals to understand, true liberals that may be agnostic, is that our understanding of the presumption of innocence and a lot of our common law is rooted in the Bible. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, God will not destroy the town if there is but one righteous person in it. That translated over thousands of years into our understanding of it is better that 10 guilty persons go free than one innocent suffer. So I say this specifically to people who may not be religious, or if you're religious and you want to present an understanding of how religion can be a good thing. I have a lot of liberal friends who are just of the complete belief that, you know, Christianity, Judaism, Islam are all just awful because they're... No. What we've been able to do is take these ideas through thousands of years that are good and transform them into part of society that we think are even better. And we've gotten rid of a lot of bad things.
Yeah.
So I just like telling that story for people who are religious because I think it's an effective way to communicate to people who might be atheist or agnostic the benefits of religion.
Yeah.
Blackstone's formulation literally is rooted in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, absolutely. And various civilizations picked up good things, sometimes bad things, like you say.
And then we keep the good and we get rid of the bad.
Even the concept of human rights after World War II came from some religious thinking. We're fighting over what is a human right again.
Right. So I think, there you go. Final thought.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us, and good luck with the new studio and all the projects here, Tim. Cheers.
Thank you.
Once again, you have been listening to a conversation between our executive director, Paul Glatter, and award-winning American journalist, Tim Pool. Please take a moment to follow our podcast and like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check us out online at religionunplugged.com and themediaproject.org.